How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Down to Earth with Christian Harloff. This is our daily UAP news channel from Monday through Friday. And we hope that you subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers. We hope that you'll be along for the journey. So if you didn't know, we have a weekly podcast that we do. It's called UAP Tuesdays. It's on my other channel, the Christian Harloff channel. We do that every Tuesday. So that dropped today. Inside of that episode, we had an exclusive interview with Paul Hynek, who is, of course, the son of, some say, the father of modern ufology, Alan Hynek from Project Blue Book, who went on to be a consultant with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and on and on and on and on. So we had a great conversation, and Pavel had the conversation with him. So even though it's on that episode, I thought it would live here as its own piece, so that way people could find the interview itself here. So if you wanted to clip it out, put it on X, and do all those things that you want to do with it, it's a very, I thought it was very insightful. I thought it was a good point of view, and Pavel's just really good at this too. So take a listen. Here is the interview with Pavel and Paul Hynek. Enjoy.
Thank you, Christian. It's an honor for me to sit down for a few minutes with Mr. Paul Hynek, professor of finance and accounting at Pepperdine University, entrepreneur, futurist, author, writer, consultant, and UFO researcher, who is also known for being the son of the father of ufology, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. How are you, Professor? How's it going?
I'm great. Thank you, Pavel. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I guess I would like you to speak a little bit on the Contact in the Desert event. I understand you're going to be a speaker there. What are you going to be talking about? And what is Contact in the Desert for those who don't know?
Contact in the Desert is one of my favorite conferences. It's, each conference has its own kind of flavor or angle. And Contact in the Desert leans into science, not just UFOs, but other related topics in AI, etc. I'll be giving 3 presentations, moderating a panel on 2 other panels, and then behind a curtain for a secret demonstration. I'll talk about Ufology 101, which is sort of a primer for the, let's say, UFO curious. And I'll give another presentation on how to demonstrate the objective reality of your encounter so that you can demonstrate that they are real. And my other presentation will be, I call it Bitcoin astronomy, which is the nexus between UFOs, DMT, and Bitcoin.
So you also, I understand you were, or I don't know if you still are, a journalist, a tech journalist, right? You a freelance. You've written a lot of articles?
No, I mean, I've written some articles. I wouldn't call myself a journalist.
Okay. But you have written articles, and you also have a book called the UFO Technology Handbook.
Yeah, about potential propulsion techniques that spaceships could use.
Because I've been talking about this for a while now on my personal channel. And I did speak to Nick Cook. You know who he is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he told me that he hit a dead end in terms of propulsion technology because he has that famous book, The Hunt for Zero Point. Do you concur that this anti-gravitic technology everyone talks about, is that possible, or could it be real?
It's certainly possible, and I've worked with my brother and a friend of ours on trying to create essentially an anti-gravity machine. So far, without success.
Okay.
But in general, Pavel, I'm skeptical of the possibility of extraterrestrials from other planets visiting us on Earth. I lean more towards an interdimensional hypothesis.
Yeah, because there are many hypotheses. I've tried to read and catch up to all the other ones, but I do agree with you that extraterrestrial hypothesis is the least likely. And I think it's really interesting, though. This is not a nice segue. How Arrow has spoken about this on their report, this specific term of ET. what do you make of that report from Arrow and how they use that specifically? It seemed deliberate, right?
Yeah, I really don't care what the US government says or does regarding either UFOs or cryptocurrency. They are a bad faith, corrupt central actor that does not have the interests of citizens in mind. They have engaged for many years in active disinformation efforts. And so I don't trust, nor am I very much interested in what the government says or does.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you too on that. I think it's kind of funny to me that uh, there's this wave of people that want us to trust the government with this. Given all the history they have, it's really rich, I think.
And, I've done this role play at UFO conferences where people are very much interested in, and let's say, believe in UFOs. And I'll say, let's do a role play. Pretend we are all the top brass of the United States Air Force. And we have gathered here today to decide whether we are going to disclose the information that we have. All of us in this room, we know everything, where the bodies are, the crashed saucers. We have all the information. And we have these subpoenas telling us we need to release this information. Now, in a minute, we'll take a vote as to whether we should release this information. But before we do, I'll tell you my attitude. General Hynek. No goddamn way am I going to release this information. I don't care what subpoenas there are. I don't care who the politicians are. I don't care about the Constitution. I joined the Air Force for full spectrum dominance, not compliance. It's my job to be on that wall. You want me on that wall to protect us. And I'm not going to let some pasty-faced pencil pusher on Capitol Hill tell me what to do. I am not going to release this information to the Chinese and the Russians. Okay, now let's take a vote. Who wants to disclose our secrets? And very few, if any, hands will go up.
Yeah.
That's the attitude that we're fighting against. And I don't believe that the Air Force should disclose this information. It's not their job to lessen our dependence on fossil fuel. It's not their job to advance civilization. It's their job to kick ass. And that's it. That's what I want them to do. So that's why I think we may be waiting for a long time for the type of disclosure that we see in movies.
Yeah. And also, well, given all that I've tried to read, all the hypotheses and all that, I think disclosure kind of already has been happening for decades.
Yeah, a lot of people consider it a process as opposed to an event.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you agree?
Well, again, I don't really care what they say or do. But let's say that they do want to disclose. It's much more difficult than it used to be. 30, 40 years ago, here in the US, you'd have a journalist like Walter Cronkite narrate live video of a flying saucer landing on the lawn of the White House. Everybody believes it. But now, if the Biden administration releases this information, the Republicans don't believe it, and vice versa. So it's a very difficult proposition for them, even if they do have the information and want to disclose it.
Yeah, I agree as well. I wanted to ask you like something a little bit more personal from your time growing up next to Dr. Hynek. Was this topic ever strange or uncommon for you and your family growing up? How did everyone in your family take it? Is it more normal than it could be for the rest of us?
Well, Pavel, however you grow up is normal to you until you're older and you look back at it and you tell your friends, oh, we did this. But I don't know a life without UFOs. We had flying saucer ornaments on the Christmas tree. We had UFO people from the Air Force or witnesses coming over for dinner all the time. And it was something that we talked about it quite often, and it was just part of our upbringing. So it was quite normal to us and fascinating. And we thought it was great.
I can only imagine, like, you went through something a little bit similar, not at all, but not completely, but to what the Bledsoe family is going. I would think, because they also have been around the topic their entire lives. I
Yeah.
think you went through something similar, right?
Yeah, and now I go to conferences and do TV, etc. I've done a lot of public speaking, but before it was about making movies like Avatar or some other tech topic. But there really is no topic in life that I'm more familiar with than UFOs.
And also, you seem still excited talking about it, even though you have been doing it for decades. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, this is an inexhaustible supply of fascination.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so uh, with your father, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, he was the director of projects Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book. Uh, you've seen, I'm sure, online how uh, people have tried to compare what your father was doing during that time before he uh, revealed himself to be a believer of whatever this intelligence is. And there have been many comparisons with what Dr. Kirkpatrick is doing right now. What would you say to that, to the people that try to compare both and how they're
I
doing?
wouldn't say he was a believer, but he went from being a debunker and a skeptic to somebody who accepted the weight of the data. It's a little bit different for a scientist. They don't typically say the word believe, right? Um, and I just don't know enough about Mr. Kirkpatrick to know how he might be like my father or not.
Okay, that makes sense. Uh, with that in mind, though, is there anything about your father that people may have misunderstood? Do you think?
Well, because I often talk about my father in the context of UFOs, people see him as a UFO guy. He didn't see himself that way. He was a professor and he loved communicating about science and astronomy. He was an astrophysicist and an astronomer. That's how he self-identified. So at home, like we talked about UFOs, but it wasn't all the time. UFOs were kind of a late in life side gig for him. So people think of him as all consumed by UFOs. And indeed, he spent a lot of time on it, but it wasn't his core passion, which was just simply astronomy.
Yeah. You've already given me what you think about this disclosure effort, but I still feel the need to ask you about what people like David Grush, Ryan Graves, David Fravor are doing. What is your opinion on what they are trying to do as people from the military? Because I know that you and I do not expect the government to bring about
Right.
disclosure, but what they have done, I think it has value. What's your take on what they have done?
Sure. I applaud them coming forward with their accounts because it's one thing for some dusty document to come to light and it to be released online. It's quite another for an Air Force pilot to say, I saw something that cannot be explained by my understanding of our physics, and I want people to know about it. Or I saw something in a hangar that I wasn't supposed to see, or etc. It's very compelling, and I'm very happy that they're doing that.
Hmm, okay. And I understand you were a consultant for the Blue Book show.
Yes.
I was so excited when that show came out, I gotta say.
Hmm.
I think it's really top-notch sci-fi for my taste. I've been a movie and TV shows addict for my entire life, so especially sci-fi. How was that process? How did you live through that time? Because I'm guessing you must have been really excited to be participating in something like that.
Well, my brother Joel and I learned about the show that was being made, and reached out to the production team, and they were happy to get us involved and hire us as consultants. And this show was being made with or without us. And so we had a family discussion, and we thought, well, look, if we can get involved and not control it, but influence it to some degree, that's better than if we have no involvement. And for the record, I'll say it's not creepy at all to have the super villain from Game of Thrones play your TV father. He turned out to be a very nice guy, as was the woman who played my mom and Michael Malarkey and the whole cast. And often when you're a consultant on a movie or TV show, that means that the production entity will call you when they have a question. But in this case, since both my brother and I have a lot of experience in Hollywood, they gave us all the scripts to read in advance, and we could give them input. I visited the set several times and did publicity tours with the cast. So we were really integrated with the production of the show and made a lot of input in the show and became friends with the cast and the crew of the show.
One part of that show's storyline that I think it's really interesting was a part of when the late President Kennedy was still a senator, and he was speaking to Dr. Hynek and his partner. What of those exchanges could be perceived as more accurate in your view as a consultant of the show?
It's a good question. And in general, the show is very clear in saying that they are striving for authenticity, not accuracy. And I think you picked up on that message. Specifically regarding encounters with Kennedy, I don't know. One of the things that's interesting is I've learned so much about my parents after they passed away that they never said. I think a lot of people from that generation just wouldn't start a conversation saying, hey, did I tell you about the time I talked to President Kennedy? They just wouldn't bring it up. And it's in reading about him or hearing stories that I learned a lot of these things that I didn't know before.
And well, I speaking of those things that they don't talk about much, but I gotta ask about this because I think it's a fascinating subject. The whole concept of the invisible college, which is a concept that was coined and created first in the late 1600s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
but your father was the one who continued with that tradition. What can you tell us? Any details you can tell us that you know about that, even if you didn't learn them directly from your father, maybe later?
Yeah. So it was my father and his longtime friend and collaborator, Jacques Vallée, who realized that there were a lot of mainstream scientists, especially astronomers, who privately were very open or leaned into the idea that we might have some type of alien visitors. And my father liked to call them meta-terrestrials, as opposed to exclusively extraterrestrials. So meta-terrestrial, meaning that they're not from Earth as we know it, which is a much broader spectrum than just from another planet. And so Jacques and my father were very sensitive and understanding that scientists couldn't publicly reveal their stance. And indeed, I have copies of letters between Arthur C. Clarke and my father, where Arthur C. Clarke tells my father that publicly I cannot speak in support of UFOs, but privately I'll tell you I very much appreciate and respect your outlook, Dr. Hynek, on UFOs. And so Jacques and my father felt it was important to kind of create an intellectual safe space for them to share their feelings and their outlook without being disclosed publicly.
Okay, and what do you know about the Rosicrucianism, which is also another tradition, but I understand your father and Dr. Vallée were part of it too. Is that right?
Yeah. People tend to think of my father, and, as scientists are portrayed in TV and movies, and not just Project Blue Book, they're often, because for one part, you need to have a knowledgeable voice, but you can't bring in a new expert every episode. So typically what they'll do is make a scientist who's a smart person know everything about science. And also kind of almost become like Dr. Spock from Star Trek, where they're always talking about that's not logical, I cannot compute. And logic is not a word my father would use a lot. He's a physicist. It would talk about viable or likely. And so my father, although he wasn't a dogmatically religious man, he did have Rosicrucian leanings. And indeed, after he passed away, one of the Rosicrucian tenets is to not disturb the body for 3 days. So we honored that wish.
Okay.
And he also was very interested in Rudolf Steiner and the Theosophy movement.
Yeah, I know that well. I am actually, I do have my own investigation in my channel that has a lot to do with the universal language, is what I call it, which Steiner spoke about it plenty. Itzhak Bentov spoke about it in an indirect manner, and I find it fascinating. I wish I could go more deeply into topics like this. But
I have a funny story for you, Pavel. So I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I lived in the dorm on campus. And that dorm was right down the street from a restaurant called the White Dog Cafe. And it's a row house, and it's a lovely restaurant, one of my favorite restaurants. And it's the former house of Madame H.P. Blavatsky, who was a pioneer in theosophy. And it's called the White Dog because in the late 1800s, she was diagnosed with gangrene. And the doctors told her they would need to amputate her leg. And she said, fancy that. I'll not have my leg enter the spirit world before me. And she credited sleeping with her white dog as having cured her. So that's why the restaurant is named the White Dog.
That's an amazing story. Thank you. Yeah, it does. I guess that's like the ultimate search, the ultimate question one wants answered, right? What happens after we die?
You're absolutely right. I mean, what are the biggest questions to face mankind? Is there life after death? And then is there life elsewhere? And are they coming to see us? And why? But those are, and then maybe what's the meaning of life? I think those are the top 3 questions for mankind. And so my father, he felt his job was to push mainstream science, the borders of scientific understanding, a little bit farther out, and to take a flashlight and to illuminate those sort of dark corners. And so he worked for quite a while on one of those super important questions.
And you told me that you believe more in the interdimensional hypothesis.
Yes.
Can you please expand more on that? And because I think there are more than one interdimensional hypothesis. One is
yes.
One is more religious, and there are others that are more scientific. Where do you land on
so I would say mine is psychedelic.
Oh my God.
I was asked by a friend of mine who crash landed tardigrades on the moon one day where my father thought UFOs came from. And I said, well, as a scientist, he was very comfortable saying the weight of the evidence suggests that something is happening, but where they come from, that's sort of beyond a scientist's knowledge base. But my father would say that, as we've talked about, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, it doesn't seem that likely. It seems a little bit sloppy, and maybe it's interdimensional or time travel. Who knows? So my friend said, whoa, you need to read a book called Alien Information Theory. And I said, Alien Information Theory? That's maybe the sexiest book title ever. Of course I'll read it. What's it about? And my friend said, well, it's by a neuroscientist named Andrew Gallimore, who believes that the experiences people have under the influence of DMT, the most powerful psychedelic drug in the world, one variant being known as ayahuasca, are actually real experiences in some other kind of dimension. And I said, oh, you mean, so my dad thought UFOs may come from another dimension, and DMT is thought by some to be a ticket to another dimension. In the interest of science, I need to try that.
Yeah, actually, my channel has a lot to do with that. It's called Psicoactivo. It means psychoactive in English, and that's how I named my channel, because I also believe much of this. And I think that the Imperial London College is doing a
Yeah,
mapping of a place through DMT. Is that
yeah,
correct?
they're trying to map the topography. And so I become fascinated by DMT. And so that's why one of my talks at Contact in the Desert is the nexus of UFOs, DMT, and Bitcoin.
Oh my God. I never done that specifically, but I did delve into many psychedelics back in the day, and I can sense that I which I mentioned already, that universal language, which it keeps coming to my mind, and it just essentially it's not really that difficult to understand, but it is difficult to practice, because I think it has to do with empathy towards others. It has to do with trying to always put yourself in the shoes of another person whenever that
Mhm.
person is going through something very difficult. And I think that these substances help uh, reach that goal quicker. But I think also that alongside the UFO topic, psychedelics have been stigmatized for decades, since the 60s. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because at that time, the one thing that was putting people off from going to war and killing others were psychedelics, and was the whole psychedelic movement. And
Yeah.
I think, I don't know why I feel that if that hadn't happened, we would have possibly had a better chance at evolving our minds.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're familiar with the stoned ape theory that
Yes.
our early ancestors, by dint of psilocybin and perhaps other substances, really took a big step forward in our evolution. And yeah, I completely agree with you. Fortunately, here in the United States, which is often very regressive, there is a sort of resurgence of clinical prestige regarding psychedelics,
Dr.
and a
Rick
lot of
Doblin.
studies coming out showing the therapeutic benefits of supervised and therapeutic use of psychedelics.
Yeah, but Paul Stamets is doing a lot of work there.
Yep, Paul Stamets is a hero of mine.
Yeah, Dr. Rick Doblin too. But he's
Mm-hmm.
doing it with MDMA, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. So yeah, that's really exciting. I do think that it's still too expensive for regular folk, but I'm glad they're doing a lot of advancements there. And
Yeah, and DMT is actually not expensive at all. It just needs a better marketing agency because it's relatively unknown. And for my money, the best and most fascinating substance there is.
yeah. Um, and also, I wanted to ask you about the because I was speaking last week. I did an interview with Professor Simon Holland, who broke the news that SETI found ET images, or images from another star system, and they're trying to decode them right now. But he was told from a person from EU SETI that this happened, and I was very curious to hear that in the US there's like a lot of the top brass and politicians and elites who are very scared of investigating stuff like this because of their religious beliefs. And I
Yes.
guess I guess that has a lot to do with another interdimensional hypothesis, right? What do you think about that?
Well, it's a very good point, Pavel. Lou Elizondo mentioned that also, that when he was circulating reports that he'd written, his superiors would sometimes just dismiss it because it wasn't consistent with their religious beliefs. And I think, I don't want to get too far afield here, but I think it's a very real problem that we have these people that are very dogmatic. There's a quote often attributed to Richard Feynman that my father quite liked and that I like as well, that there are two kinds of people in the world. The first kind are okay if they have questions they cannot answer. The second kind are not okay if you question their answers. And it breaks the world into two types. And if you're really interested in the UFO phenomena, and especially if you haven't had a deeply personal experience, you by definition have to be comfortable with a lot of questions you cannot answer. Like the way we've been talking. It could be extraterrestrial, or that could be part of it. We don't know. And for a lot of people though, they're uncomfortable because they say, well, yeah, I know there's evidence. I know the New York Times and the Navy have said that there are UFOs, but I don't know where they come from or why they come here or what they eat. And they just shut down and won't think about it anymore. It's an awkward intellectual resting point to lean into a phenomena, whichever phenomena, and say, yeah, I think something's happening, but I don't know what. And I think it's dangerous that in the US, we have this gene in our makeup that predisposes us to be very dogmatic and very, and this is the truth, this is the reality, and I won't listen to anything else. And I think it's a growing risk for us.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think that maybe, I don't know, what ways do you see this message or getting people to understand that this is very real? Because I see that the large majority of people who consume media in America are not even interested in this. Many of them get weirded out. And
Yeah,
I guess what Christian and I are trying to do, along with Mark Riley and many other channels that are new to this, is trying to bring the information to people and helping them, or maybe help them understand that it's real. We honestly, I don't think there's anyone specifically who knows what it is, or if it's many things, but at least maybe help get some of that stigma out and that weirdness that comes when you hear something that scares you, right? What do you think about that?
well, good for you. For a lot of people, their concern is paying rent and putting food on the table. And this topic, more than likely than not, is not going to affect that. So it's just something that is cool to think about, but what can I do? It's not going to help me. And those people, more power to them. Do what you need to do to get by. For those who have some extra bandwidth to devote to something like this, that's so ineffable and ephemeral, yeah, I think it's very nice for them to be able to come across a podcast like yours of a honest interlocutor trying to find the truth. And I sense that you don't really have a horse in this race. You just want to find the truth. And I think people, by doing that, you can welcome people into this. I mean, you're not wearing a tinfoil hat. You're not doing some kind of special salute. So I think you can help people come along the UFO curious and lean more into the phenomenon.
What do you think? Just a couple of more questions, though. I wanted to ask you about this idea that there's people who believe this technology was already cracked and it's being used for black projects, and people who think it hasn't been cracked yet, but they're trying to, but they haven't yet.
Right.
Because your book is a lot about new tech, right?
Yeah.
And what do you think there's any truth to that, or do you think it still hasn't been cracked?
I don't know. But I would say if some entity in the US, whether it's military branch or a three-letter government agency, has essentially cracked key alien technology. Had they done that, I think they would be speaking English in Beijing and Moscow by now. I just don't see that we sit on that and continue to feel threats from other countries. No, like I said, they're here for full spectrum dominance, and they're not going to sit by if they have the best technology ever. They're going to want to use it, and not in a limited way, but to achieve dominance before another country can achieve dominance, say through terrestrial AI.
Okay. And I have one last question. We could cut this out if you feel that
I'm
we
good.
can cut it out, but I'm going to ask it. Is there anything that you maybe haven't shared with the world about your father's work that you may want to share with the audience that you haven't shared yet, that you can share, obviously, because I guess there's a lot of stuff that maybe you don't feel that
It's an interesting question. I don't know. After Project Blue Book, my father was pretty open. And I don't really feel, I don't have a security clearance, so I have no limitations on what I can say, perhaps limitations on what I can see. But there's not really any burning thing that I'd like people to know that we haven't disclosed, my siblings and I, about our father. I mean, he was a little Czech boy in Chicago who didn't speak English until school, who at the age of 7 decided he wanted to be an astronomer, followed his passion his whole life. And along the way, a funny thing happened and he got drawn up in UFOs and did his best to push us closer to an answer.
All right. Thank you so much for that. We're going to leave it here, but before that, I would like to thank you, Professor Hynek, for giving us your time. This was a really nice conversation. We hope it's not the last time we speak. I hope you enjoyed yourself, because I certainly did. I wanted you to tell the people where they can find you and what you have going on right now that they can look forward to.
Sure. Thank you. And it has been great, Pavel. I have a pretty anemic social media footprint, but I guess the easiest place to find me is on Twitter or X, just Paul Hynek.
All right. And you're going to be on that Contact on the Desert?
Yes, I'll be at Contact in the Desert.
What are the dates of that? I'm sorry.
May 29th through June 3rd.
All right. And you're going to give it many talks or just?
Yeah, several talks and several panels.
All right. Where is that exactly?
It's in Palm Desert, which is about 2 hours east of Los Angeles.
All right. So for anybody who wants to go,
it's a great conference.
I'm guessing there are tickets still. So
I think so. And it's all in one hotel. Everybody's all together. At any one time, there are 7 different talks and panels going on.
All right. I'm guessing there are still tickets. So I'm going to leave the links in the description for everyone who wants to do it. Thank you, Professor Hynek, for your time. I'll see you soon. And yeah, have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Pavel. Enjoyed it.
Have a good one.
All right. So thanks again to Pavel. Thank you to Paul Hynek for joining us today. Thank you guys for being here. And like I said, every Monday through Friday, we have daily news updates. And if you want to find this and other things on the podcast feed, you can go to the Down to Earth podcast feed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere podcasts are found. Thanks for joining us here today. We'll see you tomorrow.